today about Israel. I guess we will have some small updates on the Iran talks, but I think we're going to focus in on more what's happening inside of Israel and the oppression faced by the Palestinians first today. So get us into what's going on here.
Absolutely. So we'll start this piece from Electronic Intifada about Hisham Abu Hawash, who at this point, the news just came out that he is going to be released from his indefinite detention, what they call administrative detention. He's been held under since October of 2020. Again, without charges and no trial. Shin Bet, which is the domestic sort of spy agency, which is implicated in torture and things like that. They claim he's a member of Islamic Jihad, although they according to Haaretz and Bet Salem, the top Israeli human rights organization, they say that they haven't provided a shred of evidence backing that up. And it's created a lot of tensions. But Hisham has gone on a 140-day, about 100, maybe 141 days at this point. It ended today, but his hunger strike as a protest to these conditions and the fact that he's being held without charges on trial. And he's a father of five from a village called, he's 40 years old, a father of five from a village called Dura near Hebron in the occupied West Bank. He had lost consciousness during the hunger strike. He lost his eyesight, his ability to speak, slipped in out of a coma, I believe I saw in some of these reports. And it sounds like, let's see. So he's according to a group called the Palestinian Prisoners Club. They said that the occupation authorities have been committing a crime against him by refusing to respond to his call to end his arbitrary detention. And they did something strange. They started moving him around. They called this. Well, basically, they move people around when they do these hunger strikes. The judges, since 2015, it sounds like the high courts have allowed these things they call suspensions, where they essentially transferred him to different medical facilities. In fact, one of which they explain here that they had stalled his transfer to a civilian hospital in recent months and kept him in what's described as the grossly inadequate Romley Prison Clinic, which is nicknamed the Slaughterhouse by Palestinians who have been detained there. But they moved him now. He's in Tel Aviv at the Shamir Medical Center, and this was on December 26th because his detention was, quote, suspended. But he didn't stop his hunger strike because he says it doesn't change anything. So the way that works is they make you a prisoner in a hospital as opposed to being a prisoner in a official detention facility. So let's see. So Physicians for Human Rights Israel is quoted as saying the use of administrative detention in hospitals as detention facilities must be stopped. It says even in hospital, Abu Hawash remains a prisoner. He cannot leave the hospital. He can't return home. He can't even go to another hospital without getting permission from the Israeli government. And the only difference is that he can have family members visit him. On Monday, the Israeli authorities kicked out all reporters and other supporters from the facility. And so let's see. So basically, I got a quote from Bet Salem who said, because they the idea is that he's dangerous, so he can't be like, oh, they said a dying person can pose no danger. He has never been proven to be dangerous in the first place. By contrast, truly dangerous are government members, military officers, justices, and prison guards who imprison hundreds of Palestinians without trial. And so I'll just point out before we get to later news on him being released that it's also noted here in the article that as we're moving in now into the new year, Israel is holding 500 Palestinians in this administrative detention where they're charged, or they're not charged, but there's secret evidence held against them. They're not allowed to see in these military courts. It's without charge, no trial. And of the 4,550 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, occupation prisons right now, 160 of the prisoners are children.
And it seems like that they kind of keep them in almost like a gitmo limbo type situation where we say you're too dangerous to be let go, but we really don't have a case to bring against you in any kind of actual fair court, at least. I guess,
Precisely.
they'll get the kids especially to like sign a confession in a language that they don't speak in order to like, get them out of jail and, find the parents a few thousand shekels and then demolish their homes or something for a crime that the kids never committed. Yeah, but it's really crazy to talk about a situation, Connor, in a state that's so supported by the U.S. where they're starving. Like if you get arrested without a charge being placed on you, you have to starve yourself to get out of prison. I mean, maybe you could compare this to like horrible like situations like Khalif Browder in the Rikers prison in the U.S. Although at least he was charged with something, even if he never got a trial for the stupid trivial charge he had. But I mean, this is happening systematically to the Palestinians in the West Bank. Just crazy levels of oppression that they're facing.
Well, you were just covering on a recent show about the Israeli intelligence agent who was like, provoking essentially kids on the internet.
Yep.
And you quoted a statistic. Was it 50% of Palestinians in the occupied territories at some point going through the some sort of detention facility?
Yeah, and I believe
Men and women.
I read that was men and women, and then somewhere I read that the number for women is 25%. So I don't think there's like a 1-to-1 balance between men and women in Palestine and the West Bank, but somewhere around then like 75% give or take of Palestinian men have been to prison, and so. That's why it is essentially conditioned Palestinian children that being arrested by the Israeli military is like a rite of passage. Like you're going to be in like the small percentage of people who don't dissent enough to get arrested or something like that. And yeah, that was a part of that story. So what else is going on in Israel, Connor? Or anything else on that hunger strike story?
I'll just add that he is at this point, after 141 days, his lawyer announced today. I got this report from Al Jazeera that he'll be released on February 26th. So he has ended his hunger strike. At the same time, Palestinian prisoners who are being held under this administrative detention are refusing to deal any further with the Israeli military courts, and there are still more people on hunger strikes.
Yeah.
So hopefully more attention will be brought to this story. Hamash's face was all over, or Hawash's face was all over Twitter. And for other reasons right now, Free Palestine is trending on Twitter.
Why don't we mention that and tie that,
Sure.
in here? That might be a good time to bring it up because Hermione Granger, Emma Watson, I guess, actually, said something on Twitter that was supported of Palestine. I mean, it's not like she was like the Israelis are Palestine,
settler colonial apartheid regime.
Yeah. Thank you for finding my words there for me, Connor. But what did she say, and what's the reaction?
Well, I mean, it was interesting because she just posted a picture of a pro-Palestine protest, and it said solidarity as a verb, and then she quoted this British Australian activist named Sarah Ahmed. She goes, and the quote is actually, it's like you said, it's very, I mean, honestly subdued. It says solidarity does not assume that our struggles are the same struggles, or that our pain is the same pain, or that our hope is for the same future. Solidarity involves commitment and work, as well as the recognition that even if we do not have the same feelings or the same lives or the same bodies, we do live on common ground. And Gilad Erdan, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, and Danny Danon, the former Israeli ambassador to the UN, they came out. They called her an anti-Semite. Danny Danon says, he goes 10 points from Gryffindor for being an anti-Semite, and then Erdan said, fiction may work in Harry Potter, but it does not work in reality. If it did, the magic used in where he says Twitter. They both said this on Twitter. If it did, and she was on Instagram, but he goes, if it did, the magic used in the wizarding world could eliminate the evils of Hamas, which oppresses women and seeks the annihilation of Israel, and the PA, which supports terror. I would be in favor of that. So now they got. I mean, that was just a horrible PR move. The reports are all saying, and I believe Free Palestine and Emma Watson are still trending on Twitter. People came to her defense by and large. I mean, many people were saying, as they say here, that this diminished attention to real cases of anti-Semitism, which of course it does. Lately, there have been more, suspicious reports about, oh, this guy got punched in the eye for wearing an IDF shirt, I think in New York or something like that, and these people were all coming out, IDF shirt challenge, hashtag this, and I don't know. I mean, this lady Leah Greenberg is quoted, she's the co-executive director of a group called the Indivisible Project, and she says that Dannon's remarks are, quote, a perfect demonstration of the utterly cynical and bad faith weaponization of anti-Semitism to shut down basic expressions of solidarity with the Palestinian people. And her Watson's Instagram post has 600,000 likes and over 47,000 comments right now.
Yeah. So that is one thing that kind of makes me laugh is sometimes, I think that the people like in the foreign policy establishment or like, the blob in general think that they run social media and everything like that because, when they're picking on antiwar.com or something like that, their followers outnumber, but, Harry Potter is another level, and Emma Watson has a very loyal following. And so, in this case, it may be more that, the reaction is in the overreaction, right? And that's where all the power will be, is if they go too hard on Emma Watson here and her supporters go, I'm going to read about this a little bit or something, where if they had said nothing because she really didn't say that much of anything anyways, then nothing happens. Nobody cares. But it's all the value is in the Israeli lobby's reaction, and so maybe this is actually a little bit of a good sign and not bad news to see this happen.
Yeah, and I'll just point out. I mean, I haven't as far as just to clarify on that story about the guy who got punched with the IDF shirt. It was just funny because a lot of to your point, Zionists on Twitter were coming out and saying how dare we're being forced to denounce our only means of defending ourselves. I forget what this woman's name is, Eve Barlow or something like that. She said, we have to denounce, we're being told to denounce our only means of self-defense in order to just be, free from hate crimes, something like that. And it's much more nuanced than that. If you're wearing the IDF shirt, a lot of people think it's totally okay to punch Nazis. That was a very common thing for a while. And especially from neoliberals, that was kind of the attitude. And I don't necessarily support that. I mean, it depends on what the Nazi is doing. We're libertarians, so it's the non-aggression principle. But wearing a shirt sporting basically proudly brandishing the insignias and logos of an apartheid regime occupation force is provocative in and of itself. So it might not warrant it certainly doesn't warrant just being punched. But there's a lot of nuance involved in that conversation.
Right. If somebody wearing a Nazi uniform walked into a temple or something like that.
Exactly.
And somebody punched them in the face and I was on that jury. Sorry, Nazi, but you know what I mean? You're obviously going there to try to instill fear in them. And so the fact that you got punched in the face and they rejected your effort to intimidate them is fine with me. And so, what, there are different limits to that. Although I guess probably wearing an IDF shirt in public, I don't know if that reaches that level, especially when you have, and I mean, this is unfortunate and a real problem in our culture, but people like Gal Gadot is, super popular. She's Wonder Woman or I don't know. I lose track of all these things. Anyways, but since she was a part of the IDF and everything, I don't know, I could just see random people wearing IDF shirts and really not understanding where there really can't be a misunderstanding. If you're wearing some Nazi, maybe if you're from a different country or something like that, I'll feel bad. I don't know, maybe in different areas of the world, they mock Nazis rather than, treat them like Voldemort or something, like, we don't say the name, where other people, like, it may be more of like you treat Hitler like the US did what, in like the 1950s, where like, they had him like doing stupid dances on the screen and stuff like that and all those old movies.
Yeah. Even during the Third Reich's
Yeah.
reign, you had the Three Stooges and stuff like that, Charlie Chaplin and
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. You're right. It was during the war. But anyway, like, what? So, like, if other people mock then, but generally speaking, I don't know, punching people in the IDF, sure, if that, quite gets to that level. But, it's not also probably something provocative that most people understand what they're doing. Anyways, Connor, what else do we got going on here?
Yeah, so Yair Lapid is very concerned about stuff like this. He just had a Zoom meeting with Israeli journalists talking about how he's very concerned that in 2022 Israel is going to, what did he call it? He says it's a radioactive venomous threat or a venomous debate. He says, we think in the coming year there will be a debate that is unprecedented in its venom and its radioactivity around the words, quote, Israel is an apartheid state. In 2022, it will be a tangible threat. And so he specifically points, the Israelis are specifically pointing to probes by the International Criminal Court into Israeli war crimes, the UN Human Rights Council's efforts they're going to establish a commission inquiry into Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. The Human Rights Council as well is going to investigate Operation Guardian of the Walls, which we covered extensively on this show back in May, when the Israelis bombed it was a bunch of different things. I mean, honestly, it was the raids on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where they were, firing rubber-coated bullets at people's eyes and faces, and throwing sound bombs and stun grenades and attacking people.
Yeah, and they attempted to seize homes in Sheikh
Sheikh
Jarrah. And along with then everything that happened in and around Gaza, including, ramping up the blockade, restrictions on fishing and everything else. Everybody knows about the bombing campaign and everything like that, but there are also other restrictions that are worth mentioning.
For sure, and so Guardian of the Walls is specifically referring to the military operation in Gaza. They killed somewhere around 250 Palestinians, maybe more, and about approximately 60 children, and just destroyed, I believe, tens of thousands of homes. And homes are still collapsing to this day, as you reported on a recent show. And so Yair Lapid says, he goes, the Commission of Inquiry into Guardian of the Walls is unprecedented because it doesn't have a time limit. It doesn't have a limit of scope, and it is well funded with many people working on it. Building on the conversation with the whole Ben and Jerry's scandal again about the thing with Emma Watson, the Israelis really have a problem here because they're, the way they treat Palestinians is essentially indefensible. And so their reaction to baselessly throw out accusations of anti-Semitism against anybody who, either wants to peacefully boycott or not do business under the apartheid regime in the occupied territories, or just say that they express solidarity with the occupied Palestinians. They, I don't know what their plans are. They're probably trying to get these journalists to ramp up the Hasbara. There's a good article I recommend people read about this at Mondo Weiss right now. But it's just, they always end up sort of doubling down and exposing themselves even further, because there's a lot of people who probably wouldn't have known. They probably would have assumed BDS is just, a bunch of whatever. Maybe like if you're a Republican, you think, oh, these are pansy liberals who like Bernie Sanders and they don't like Israel. What are you going to do? But they made a whole thing of, now everybody knows, or at least a lot of people know about these BDS laws that, that they've lobbied, 30 different states or something like that to put these different anti-BDS laws on the books, so that they can, defund the pensions of all these different, companies that are, like Unilever, I believe, in various states. And I mean, I haven't been following it as closely, but I know DeSantis has been very hawkish on this.
Florida, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, Texas, I believe Arizona. I've covered them all on the show, so people have been listening, but I can't recall them all from memory. But there's been several, and I think there's a few more that I left off of that list where, the laws vary. Some of the laws like require the state legislator to take the action, or some of them it's more of like a governor appointment or just like a state employee who like holds some random office who somehow got that job, who gets to decide. And then in other cases, it's like the governor or whoever's in charge of the state gets to make that decision. But yeah, it's so much hostility towards people who support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, where most of the people that really all they're focused on is the boycott and the divestment. I rarely hear anybody advocate for sanctions against Israel, and to the extent that they do, it's more ceremonial in like this is what helped to bring down the apartheid South Africa regime, and to I think draw parallels to that movement. But really, what they're talking about is boycott and divesting from Israel, and sanctions is a bad word sometimes when in reality you could just talk about shutting off U.S. funding for the Israeli government. That would be a significant blow. They get a lot of money from the U.S., $4+ billion a year.
Well, that's the whole thing. That's what's ironic about it. If you look at and even to your point about the South African situation, you can look up videos of like rock stars and musicians holding massive concerts in the late 80s. American musicians like Steven Van Zandt of the Bruce Springsteen group and Chrissie Hynde from the Pretenders holding these big concerts where I think Steven Van Zandt, I've seen this before. He has a song, it's called The Sanctions Song, and the chorus is like, let's tighten up those sanctions. So like, yeah, I mean, this is it's not like, and as you said, it's more about, they say that you're delegitimizing the Israeli state. And that's the issue with the boycott and the divestment. And the last thing on that I was just going to say is that sorry, man, I just lost my train of thought there for a second.
That's all right. We could probably move on. And I want to ask you about this, that apparently Israel is going to form the U.S. on all deals involving China. And then if those deals are unacceptable to the U.S., Israel will look to alter them. And I don't know, I guess this is interesting because it seems like even the UAE butt the US a little bit on this, but Israel is saying that no, we're full on board, and any American discomfort, even if it results from what seems to me at some points to be just essentially kind of racism, like you don't like China and Chinese people, and so anywhere you see Chinese business, that has to be something evil and nefarious going on. And so what's going on here, Connor?
Sure. Oh, and I was just going to say before I forget, just the point about the BDS thing is like, I remember around the time of shortly after Operation Guardian the Walls, I believe Abby Martin was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Rogan was completely like flabbergasted learning about the anti-BDS laws on the books in U.S. states and couldn't believe it, and was like, how is this not like front page news about foreign interference in our democracy and this kind of thing? And that's a huge scandal. I mean, it's a Russiagate and all this kind of stuff is obviously fake, but the truth is that there is, as we've discussed recently, real intervention going on from these other allied states who want to curry more favor and get more aid and from the empire, all these satellites. But yeah, as far as China, so again, just like with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. And actually, this has been going on with Israel for a minute. Pompeo, I believe it was in March of 2019, was suggesting because of, Israel was doing business with Huawei. I mean, this was like an empty threat at the same time. But Pompeo was saying things like, we'll cut like intelligence and military ties with Israel if they continue to do business like this with China. And as Dave points out, to your point, it is very bizarre when you consider that China is our greatest trading partner, that we're going around and demanding all these other states limit or end trade with China. So China has put a lot of money into Israel for the Belt and Road Initiative. They have all kinds of infrastructure projects that they're working on, transport, different ports, as well as water infrastructure and things like this. And so the Biden administration has been continually warning them to stop this. I believe in August, Bill Burns met with Naftali Bennett. So the CIA director met with the Israeli prime minister and specifically told him, it sounds like, to stop, or was talking to him about Chinese involvement in the Tel Aviv metro. And so the U.S. is suggesting that they need to stop doing this business. And so the Israelis, I guess, have said to the Americans, well, do you have like any, do you have any alternatives? Do you have any infrastructure investments from U.S. companies? But the Americans have not offered anything as of yet. The report I have from Middle East Eye that you have up there now also indicates that Sullivan, we reported on his meetings with Israeli officials last month, that this was discussed there as well. And apparently he was talking to Yair Lapid about it, the foreign minister of Israel. And this was also a conversation that was held in a previous meeting in Washington. So the Israelis are trying to sort of figure out, like, their position here, like, because it seems like the quote is, an official, or what did they say? It's sources told Haaretz in this report that they're still taking a, quote, business as usual approach with China, but they are trying to, like, find some sort of middle ground. They want to satisfy these U.S. demands. It's kind of an interesting situation there. And previously, the Israelis, it seemed to me, were just kind of flouting the Americans' wishes, because shortly after that whole thing with Bennett, or around the same time, I remember reading about China opening up, I think it was just another private port in Israel. So let's see. So they also are very concerned about, as I said earlier, Chinese investments in Israel's tech industry as well. So now Israel is saying that they're open to promoting joint initiatives with the UAE and with India, which is also interesting because I think Israel is keen to do more business with the UAE, especially since they panicked so visibly and noticeably after there was these peaceful sort of diplomatic interactions. I believe Mohammed bin Zayed's brother, the top national security advisor, I'm blanking on his full name, but he went to Tehran and expressed essentially that they want to build close ties with Iran and develop all kinds of economic ties and overcome any obstacles that might get in the way in different sectors that they'd like to work on. And then very soon the Israelis said, we're keeping an eye on this Abu Dhabi Tehran axis. And the Americans sent, I believe, a delegation, was it from the Treasury Department over there to tighten up sanctions and talk about how UAE banks are in violation of the maximum pressure campaign on Iran. And then the Israelis, specifically Bennett, went over there. And that kind of a visit, that high level of a visit, had never happened before between Israel and the UAE. And he went down there and he specifically talked about how he wants Israel to be doing business with the UAE on the same sort of in the same sectors that the Emiratis and the Iranians were discussing cooperating in. So I mean, that was very transparent. And then, of course, there's also been a lot of talk from the China hawks about how they would like to see India sort of replace China economically in many ways, because there is this sort of push to isolate China, of course, in this sort of new Cold War paradigm. But they do point out here in the report that according to the World Bank, in 2019, Israeli exports to China totaled more than $4 billion. And in the same year, their imports from China exceeded $10 billion. So there's quite a bit of money moving around. And as they mentioned here, that China is very keen on building stronger ties, expanding, as I've noted before, the oil their oil interests in Iran, and they have infrastructure projects ongoing in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But yeah, so it's very interesting because as America sort of it's interpreted widely that they're sort of inching away, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, from the region. I mean, it's inevitable that Russia and China are getting more and more involved economically, especially, and but they can't help them. I don't know what they're going to do at some point because now the UAE did halt their Chinese construction on that port because the Americans said that they had intelligence that it was like a military installation, or they were sort of militarizing it. So things get a little bit more complicated. But I don't think they can keep that up. I think there's a lot of interest in getting China involved there. And of course, as Scott Horton will point out, a big part of our involvement in the Middle East so much in the first place was to be able to cut off states like Russia and China from Middle Eastern oil in the event of a war, and we are preparing for war with China, whether it's coming or not. That is what's going on. That's the policy.
And then there's I'll mention quickly, just between the UAE and Israel, there's a report that there's a contract, an Israeli, I believe, aerospace company, to sell the UAE what they're calling like defensive technology for their fleet of like cargo Airbuses. I think they're military planes and everything, but it just kind of interesting. But there's here a deal between the U.S. and Israel for helicopters and refueling planes. What's going on with this, Connor?
Yeah, so the Israelis last Thursday signed a deal for about $3.1 billion. They're buying 12 Lockheed Martin heavy transport helicopters and 2 Boeing KC-46 refueling planes from the U.S. Now, that $3.1 billion is American taxpayer money. This comes out of our military aid to Israel. And they're claiming that the helicopters are necessary to replace the Sikorsky CH-53 Sea Stallion helicopters that Israel's been using since the late 60s. Now, the agreement, according to the Israeli Defense Ministry, gives them the option to purchase 6 additional helicopters. But, again, the first helicopters aren't due to arrive until 2026. And I noted that it was interesting that they're buying 2 of those same refueling planes we were talking about, that report in the New York Times a few weeks ago that said that, around the time the Israeli defense officials who were talking about how they were ready to attack Iran and preparing for it and, we'll do it. They all started walking back this kind of rhetoric saying, we don't have, to be honest, we don't have the refueling tankers, we don't have the bunker buster bombs, and we don't have planes that are big enough or capable of carrying the bunker buster bombs. So, but those are 2 of those same planes. Now, it doesn't indicate exactly when those planes will be arriving, but we do know that when Gantz, the defense minister, Benny Gantz, went over to Washington last month to meet with Lloyd Austin, he requested 8 of these Boeing KC-46 refueling planes, and they were told that they won't be ready. They're on back order. They won't be ready until 2024. So it's not exactly clear to me when all this is going to be coming, but the defense ministry said that the deal is part of a wider upgrade of Israel's Air Force capabilities, goes along with the procurement of new F-35 aircraft and, quote, advanced air munition, air defense systems, new marine and land platforms, as well as cyber systems, the defense ministry said. And, of course, it's noted in the report that as they've been talking up, these tanker aircraft enable them to do, long-range attacks implicitly that is, aimed at Iran, most likely. So. And this comes on the heels of another big bombing at the Latakia port in Syria, where there's reports now I've seen of potentially 10 dead. And it's kind of going back and forth. I don't know what the latest is, but they claim that the shipping containers that they hit, at first it was saying there was food and medicine burned inside. And now I'm seeing that it's a lot of they're saying it's car parts. But initially, anyway, the reports were coming out saying that a residential area had been hit, I think even a hospital, and that they were once again waiting until a Russian plane was flying into the Russian base nearby, which they're supposed to stay away from. But the reason they do that is so the Syrian air defenses, the Syrians are reluctant to turn them on for fear of hitting the Russians, because that's happened in the past. Yep. And so, just more provocations, and I think the Russians really can't do much about it, and they kind of talk it up like, we're very upset about this, but nothing ever really changes.
Yep. And I think the hospital, my understanding is it was nearby the strike and it caught fire somehow. I'm not sure how serious, maybe the dumpster out back caught fire and now the windows burned out, or maybe entire 4 or 5 rooms got burned or something like that in the process. But let's see, Israel's also bombing Gaza. Yep. I had mentioned the possibility of this on maybe Sunday's show. I had talked about that. I was concerned that there was an exchange of gunfire along the border between Gaza and Israel, that a Israeli defense contractor who was doing some maintenance work on I don't know what was hit and lightly injured by gunfire. In response, Israel fired, I believe, a tank or some kind of artillery and injured what people in Gaza identified as 3 Palestinian farmers. And then from there, I believe Gaza fired 2 rockets that landed in the sea, but now we have Israel bombing Gaza, so this seems to be a possible escalation.
Yeah, so first of all, the as the AP notes here that it's very possible that those rockets weren't meant to hit Israel in the first place. They could have been test firing. They often test fire and fire into the Mediterranean Sea. But and of course, no casualties were reported from those rocket attacks. But yeah, so then the Israeli military launched airstrikes against what they claimed are like militant targets in Gaza. It's the usual thing you'll hear when they bomb Gaza. They go, it's a rocket manufacturing facility and a military post for Hamas. But what we actually have is video footage from Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip, where it shows 3 huge explosions. And as they say here, fighter jets can be heard flying overhead. Although this report says that there's been no immediate confirmation on possible casualties in this attack either. They also point out that tensions were running high because even though Islamic Jihad has not said that this the previously mentioned prisoner on the hunger strike was a member of their group, they did say that if he's killed, we'll treat it as an assassination by the enemy, and that there would be they would respond accordingly, militarily. And so this was kind of, they were rallying support for this man in the West Bank and Gaza, and so this was just at least partially that was what was going on here. You had tensions running high, but again, tensions are always running high if you're caged essentially in an open air prison camp under blockade, and the Israelis bomb Gaza on a semi-regular basis. And of course, there's been more and more, especially that's another thing that they're very concerned about, which was really became very obvious, that in the past they've tried to separate the Palestinians in places, like Gaza, Israel proper, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And what's happened is you're seeing that now an attack on Palestinians in East Jerusalem, like in Sheikh Jarrah, you get a reaction from the Gazans. You get Palestinian Arabs who live in Israel proper going on, strike and different things like this, and protests in the West Bank as a result of this. So the long-term strategy has not worked, this sort of divide and conquer strategy. So, that's all, of course, a part of this. But as of now, yeah, I haven't heard on any casualties or to the extent the damage is in these strikes.
All right, Connor.